Hey, Hunters, Halozu here for another look at Starfinder 2E's playtest. This time we're going to be looking at the first of the 6 classes. Apparently there's word that, yeah, these are the only 6 classes coming in the core rulebook, which I'm not happy with, but that is for another video. Right now we're going to talk about Envoy. And of course, you can already see it up there. We are going to have to talk about something else. But also, as a quick reference for the order, I want to do this in a... I'm not going to do it in alphabetical order. I'm going to do it in order of how much I both like them, but also what I think are the classes that, in starting with the 2 classes, I think need the most work, and then go on to the 2 classes I think are kind of okay with some tweaking needed, and then the 2 classes I personally really like, even if I think they have some flaws to get over. But I don't think anyone will be surprised by what the next one I'm going to talk about is, being the Solarian. And I will say, Envoy feels like the class that is the most underdeveloped and underdesigned class, I'd say, where it's the one that it's not really that interesting compared to a lot of the others. And another class that unfortunately kind of competes with it due to a kind of inevitable reason. But then Solarian is just straight up the worst class in power level, and it's just way underpowered. Especially with one of its features where it's just, yeah, no, it's just bad, and it's even worse than I thought it was. But for Envoy, I'm going to give more of a quick overview with a lot of this stuff, and or at least with the core class, it's going to be more of a quick overview for most of these, though with Solarian, I will mention stuff that I have discovered after a bit, in between my initial impressions and all that. Also, for reference, just to explain my position and viewpoint right now, I have yet to playtest the game, but I'm hoping to in the future, and hopefully with more people like me, as I am a D&D player first and foremost. I have looked at Pathfinder stuff, and I mean, I've looked at the Battlecry playtest, so I'm not blind to Pathfinder stuff. I just don't play it, as personally I prefer D&D a bit more. For some fundamental things, I think it works better, but I also have groups for D&D, so I play that. Uh, as it's just, for me, I find D&D overall has better design choices that I think make it overall a better game to as an experience, whereas Pathfinder I find has some questionable choices. But I'm willing to give Starfinder a chance because, unlike with Pathfinder, it doesn't directly compete with D&D for my attention. It's like, well, this is sci-fi, so if I want a sci-fi game, I want to give this a try, and I'm hoping that it's actually pretty good. Especially at first, like at launch, I want it to be like as good as possible at launch, but we'll see how it goes. Regardless, so talking about the Envoy itself, your key attribute is charisma, and that will actually matter. Uh, as I'll show some stuff in the field test, or at least with the initial features, and compare it, where it's kind of just ridiculous. You've got 8 plus con HP, so you've got a bit lower. You're not super squishy, but you're slightly squishy. Which, I mean, I'm granted in Starfinder 2e right now, because ultimately I'm going to look at this through the lens of I'm just playing Starfinder. Thus, its balance with Pathfinder stuff is largely irrelevant, but it is relevant if there's a class that's just way more interesting mechanically. That does matter, but, and as I'll mention later. But for Starfinder 2e, it is a low HP class, but there's only 8 or 10 HP classes right now. Probably going to change, but that's just the way it is right now. Of course, you get a social skill of your choice, plus a leadership style skill, and then 6 plus int skills, so you get a lot. Though due to the nature of your class, it does seem like you're not going to get many more. Even if I do think they kind of want high int thematically, it's also kind of that does come at the cost of the 3 save stats. But I guess you could kind of drop will a bit to get, since you've got expert and will. So your wisdom can kind of be lower, I guess, but oh well, it's just the way it is. Adding int mod skills is not my cup of tea, but oh well. You get up to martial weapons, and you only get light armor, at least by default. Then, of course, there's the normal stuff for Starfinder and Pathfinder 2e. Then we get to the first feature that is actually unique, Envoy Directive. This is literally just get them at first level, barring the feat you choose. But we'll talk more about this in a bit. But basically, the idea is that you have these directives you can use. So you can use an action, and then that's your directive. Then it has this thing you can do called Lead by Example, where basically if you follow that directive, you get a benefit for following your directive, and you basically buff it. So essentially, it's kind of well, now you've got 2 actions to do something. Or you can just do the 1 action thing, do the other stuff you need to do, and leave it at that. At least at first level. But you can't use the same directive once in a round, so you can only do it once. But if you have multiple directives, you could theoretically do all of them in a single turn. So if you have 3, well, you can do all 3, and that's your turn. But at the start, you only get them, which it's not bad, but there is a problem we'll talk about in a moment. Then you've also got your social mastermind, and size up is one of those things I'm just not a fan of, where, especially purely because of Saw It Coming, where basically you have to take a minute looking at an individual, 10 minutes like using an infosphere, basically like a computer looking them up, or you can spend an hour networking to get information. This is really annoying because it's like a +1 to deception, diplomacy, intimidation, and perception is really nice to have. So it's like, especially in combat, where it's like your charisma class, that is a really tempting bonus, because, I mean, that's a greater chance of success at the thing you'll probably be the best in your group at, and perception checks is always useful. And it also at least works against targets who know your assets. So, like, if you have, like, evil warlord as your asset, then his minions and soldiers would be considered people who know your asset. And you can have up to charisma mod assets at a time, which is just a great mercy, because field tests, you can only have one asset at a time. So, and that's one of the two uses they added for charisma baseline, which the other one was in Get 'em, but then of course you also get +1 to recall knowledge about your asset. Unfortunately, this does not apply to targets who only know your asset, but it's mixed. But then there's Saw It Coming, which is just the worst. So, basically, if you roll initiative in an encounter where your asset is an opponent, then you get +1 to the initiative roll, and you get a free weapon draw, step, or stride. This is probably the most annoying and dumbest part of it, because ultimately, it's one of those things that as a GM, I look at this and I'm like, okay. Like, as both a GM and a player, I'm like, so now the Envoy wants to do size up as much as possible in order to get Saw It Coming to trigger and also get the bonuses, and more than likely, if you are in combat with an asset every time, you can basically get this bonus all the time, as all the enemies probably know your asset. But unfortunately, because it's like you have to spend a minute observing an individual, trying to do that before every fight is going to be a pain, because it's like, well, now we got to figure out a way for the Envoy to stay hidden and look at this, observe this individual from a safe distance and all that, in order to allow them to get them as their asset, and then get into the fight. So basically it's just a minute before every fight now, because you have an Envoy trying to size up everybody. Like, even if it's once per hour, usually, like, you're not necessarily going to have combats that much. And the annoying thing is, Saw It Coming doesn't work like this part, where it doesn't work if the asset isn't there, it has to be there. And it doesn't trigger if it's just someone who knows your asset. It's like, nope, they gotta be there for this. And the recall knowledge, which, I mean, recall knowledge kind of fair, but Saw It Coming is just way more annoying than it needs to be. Yes, there's other ways to trigger it. It's just one of those things of, it's not fun having to spend time just observing someone for a bonus. And, like, as a D&D player, like, I have to make the comparison to the Battlemaster Fighter's ability that is thankfully going away, where you could spend time out of combat watching a target as they, like, fight and stuff, and then you could get information about them. Granted, where it's like, ultimately, you could ignore that, where it's not very useful information anyway, because it's like, oh, what are these traits in relation to you? So it's like, you don't really know anything unless you get the small chance that it's actually the same, but that's the only time you get precise information. You just know, is somebody stronger than me or weaker than me? And all that stuff. But this is annoying because, no, this has some actually good benefits, meaning it strongly encouraged you use this as much as possible. especially for Saw It Coming, so you can get that immediate step or stride to cover, just so you can get in a better position. Drawing a weapon, I don't think is going to be as relevant, if only because most of the time it's like, and this is just me spitballing what I think it could easily devolve into, is you probably spend a minute observing the individual, then draw your gun, and then start going to engage them. So it's not often you're going to have the interactive draw weapon come up, but I mean, if you like are in a tense negotiation and then you size up somebody and that person just is like, decides to, deal goes south, basically. It's like, oh, boom, draw my weapon. So yeah, social masterminds, just one of those that's like, not really a fan of it. Like, just because it takes such a long time to get it to work, where it's just not practical. Especially Saw It Coming. That can go die in a hole. It's like, please, no. I don't want players to be encouraged to do this at the start of every fight. Leadership style, though, is basically a subclass, so you can be from the front, where you get medium armor, and then athletics as your skill. But your leadership style also gives you acts of leadership at 6th level, which is basically, no matter what directive you used, if you take an action from among these choices after you use a directive, you trigger the lead by example. These are somewhat inconsistent, to say the least. At least in relation to other choices. So from the front, of course, you can raise a shield, which is okay. So you're using pistol or sword, probably, or take a move action to move within an enemy's reach, which, yeah, you only get 2, and one of them is very situational, as I don't know if, because also, I don't know if it triggers if you were already in that enemy's reach, but then move somewhere else in that enemy's reach. It's unclear if that works, but this is definitely something. From the shadows, you get stealth, and your perk is stealth assurance. Basically, you're even better with stealth now. Yeah. It's something. But then its bonuses are hide, sneak, and take cover. Which, I mean, for a very boring leadership style, in terms of perk and stuff, it's like, yeah, it checks out. It's useful stuff. However, I can't wait for the hiding behind the soldier shenanigans of this, but oh well. It's an interesting one, at least. Guns blazing, acrobatics, and you get incredible initiative, so you're even better at initiative. Which I guess makes up for the fact that social masterminds Saw It Coming is annoying to get, but it does stack with it, unfortunately, I think. I don't know off the top of my head what kind of bonus incredible initiative is, but oh well. Then, award for one of the worst worded acts of leadership. Yeah, make a range strike with a multiple attack penalty against an enemy. They really should have reversed those. It's so unclear if it's like, wait, so does the enemy need a multi-attack penalty, or do I need a multi-attack penalty? And also, it triggers off area fire and auto fire, which means that, because I don't think, I don't actually know if those normally trigger get 'em, but I mean, granted, at first level, like at the beginning at least, you are actually going to be a lot better with area of effect weapons than precision type ranged weapons. So, I mean, grab a screamer and go nuts. But then in the spotlight, you get performance, you get impressive performance, which and acts of leadership is perform or issue another directive, which is a neat idea, but it does run into a slight issue. And I'm just going to allude to it now. You don't have a lot of extra directives. In fact, you will run into all the directives relatively early in the game. I think by, or at least like most of them, except the limited use ones. But then hotshot, piloting, express driver, drive, take control, stunt. Might as well not be here right now, but that's just the weird state of the game where we have piloting, but there is no reason to even touch it in the playtest. It's kind of just dead. We don't have starships. We don't have mechs, though the latter is definitely coming later. Starships we know is planned for the first expansion book, unfortunately, but currently we don't have any vehicles, so it's kind of just, yeah, don't pick this. However, like now I'm just thinking of Red versus Blue with the Warthog gag of like you're just Simmons like driving everyone. I think Griff is the driver. I don't remember off the top of my head. But like you have the driver and then they might be like shouting orders, but then your gunner is getting these benefits. So there is some interesting stuff. It's just right now this one is dead in the water, but it's the playtests. We don't get to have fun with vehicles yet. Infosphere Director, you got computers and digital diversion, which is basically just use computers to create a diversion, and that's one of your acts of leadership, along with Recall Knowledge, actually, which is, they don't really get a lot of bonuses for it, especially because it requires targets being your asset, but, oh well. Then through Desperate Times, which is pretty much probably my number one suggestion for starting out, but it's got medicine. You get battle medicine for free, which is very useful for the class since you'll probably be pegged as the main support, or at least a support, if you're in the party. I mean, you're not a dedicated healer, but you really don't have a lot of healing support. Or even temporary hit point support as much, but it's there. Then, of course, administer first aid, use battle medicine, or use a healing item on an ally is your acts of leadership, which pretty good. Probably not going to be shooting allies with healing items as much, but I mean, we'll eventually get that class, I'm pretty sure. We don't know if it's coming, but I think it's safe to assume that Biohacker's coming back eventually. Probably in the third player-facing book, or primarily player-facing book. Adaptive talent third, basically just very versatile with skill feats. Do note, however, you get a skill feat every level anyway, so you get a lot of feats, and here's even more feats that you can swap between. Yeah, it's kind of wacky, but okay. Uh, then you've also got Wise to the Game, where basically you're just better at perception against feints and lies. And you get +1 will against people trying to demoralize you. But that's a +2 if it's against your asset. Though the wording does suggest it's only the will DC against demoralization. But I'd also say that it's probably intended to be all of them, but hey, this is the playtest, where there's a lot of stuff that when you look at it and think about it, it's like, oh, that's a lot of just kind of dumb wording. And stuff that's just, why was this made this way? It's like, wait. It's like, you can tell they never proofread it at all. Then 5th level, Practice Influencer. Basically, once per day, you get advantage, D&D 5e advantage on Deception, Diplomacy, or Intimidation. It works. Weapon Expertise. It does let you get critical specialization, but only when attacking your asset or the target of Get 'em. Kind of annoying, but I'm glad they at least put Get 'em as one of the triggers. Assets. Ugh, go die in a hole, please. But, well, it's just playtest jank, I guess. Well. 7th, Improvised Mastery, once a day. You can just give yourself master proficiency in a skill check. Nice. Leader's Confidence. Hey, another directive when you start with 1. So this means that unless you chose other directives, you don't get a second directive till 7th level. Yeah. It's something at least. But basically, allies in 60 feet can spend an action to brace for impact and get some temporary hit points. But if you lead by example and use this one action, or more likely use one of your other deals that triggers lead by example, unless you're a hotshot for some reason, which, I mean, it might be good one day, but we are not at that day yet. But if you do that, +1 saves against damage dealing effects, which isn't bad. Weapon specialization at 7th. Then at 9th level, you get Envoy Expertise, so I think it's kind of low, but you don't use it too much relative to some. I mean, it's better than Solarian at least, but that's just part of Paizo making Solarian weak, but oh well. Hidden Agenda at 9th. Basically, when you crit fail against an effect that would read your thoughts or whatever, you just get a failure instead. It's something, but I mean, and also, like, it's harder to sense motive against you as well. So it's there. I don't think it's going to see the most use, but it's a nice thematic bonus that ties into what the class wants to do. You are I think you are the best at perception in this system right now, at least among the 6 we have, which I'd say operative should be a bit better at perception, but that's just the sniper in me wanting as much perception as possible. Savvy influencer, extra use of practiced influencer, and the first time each day, separate from practiced influencer, you roll a nat 1 on one of those skills. It doesn't automatically reduce the degree of success, which is honestly not amazing, because I do feel like there's not going to be many cases where this actually does much, because it's probably something like, because ultimately you have to roll a nat 1, which means it's a 5% chance to happen, and it would have to be something that would be very easy to do, where it's like either it's an auto succeed or like you'd only fail on a 1. Like, it's very unlikely to do anything, because I think usually, I don't know the math on it, but it does feel like that's not going to do much a decent amount of time, because a decent amount of the time, a 1 might actually be a crit fail anyway. So it's like, so once per day, I get to say, oh, I don't reduce my degree of success from a crit fail to a crit fail. So that might, thinking about it more, that might need it might need to just be first time per day, just so it's like it only triggers if it would actually do something, rather than no matter what it would actually do, the crit fail is negated, where it's like, it's just, oh, first roll nat 1 in a day, doesn't matter if it's like, well, it was a crit fail anyway, it's still used up, which is not great. But effortless influencer, literally 2 levels after savvy influencer, which is a bit fast, but you get 3 times per day. And whenever you succeeded a check with one of the social skills, each ally in 60 feet who witnessed it gets a +1 to their next check with that skill in a minute. And it's a +2 if it was a crit success, but this also feels like it just has more limited usefulness, because ultimately you're probably the main charisma person and the main deceiver, diplomat, or intimidator in the party. So chances are it's not going to be as good, because, like, oh, you get a bonus to it, but I'm the face of the party who's specialized in that. Probably the best use I would see is with intimidation, and you have a soldier in the party. But otherwise, it's like, more practiced influencer at least. It's a bit fast after getting 2, but it is what it is. Light armor expertise at 13th. Yeah, these guys are actually kind of squishy, because they really don't get a lot of defense, which is kind of weird when they're a martial, but they're almost treated like a caster in that regard, which is kind of a weird place to be in. Then tactician, your last directive and the only high-level directive you've got. It's once per 10 minutes. And for reference, the other main directive was once per hour. So this at least is 10 minutes, but this only affects up to 5 allies. So this affects a very limited number of allies. But basically, you designate yourself attacker, defender, expert, or spellcaster, and you get a bonus. Attackers, and it's basically roll twice and get the better result. So attackers get bonus to strike a foe. Defenders either get a basically disadvantage to an opponent when they get attacked, or roll twice on a save. Experts get double roll on a skill check, while spellcasters either roll twice for an attack roll or check as part of casting a spell, or a target of the spell has disadvantage on their save. Which is nice, but I gotta bring this up. Why the heck did they omit AoE weapons from the attacker? Spellcasters give disadvantage with a saving throw. Why does an attacker? Like, I mean, I get soldiers kind of intended to be a targeted defender, but like, what if someone else wants to use a shotgun, or, well, actually the screamer, or the stellar cannon, and they want to be more of a damage dealer? What about that? You know, it's like, it kind of seems like a just baffling omission that they have stuff that does it. They could do it. It's just, it's not there. Weapon mastery at 13th, and greater weapon specialization at 15th. I mean, it's okay, I guess. Then legendary improvisation at 15th. Improvised mastery now does legendary. So, yeah, it's a nice buff, I guess. Reflex mastery at 15th. Okay, greater resolve stuff. Incredible senses, so you do get to legendary perception, which, once again, I wish that was on operative, but well. Then you have indiscernible agenda, so basically just an upgrade to the previous one, where if people try to gather information or recall knowledge about your secrets, they get a failure. If they succeed, then when you crit fail or fail on a read thoughts or something, you get a success instead. So now it's like you're even harder. I find it weird, though, that indiscernible agenda doesn't state that it's an upgrade to hidden agenda, but well. Light armor mastery. I mean, you get light mastery, but you get it, I guess. Then Silver Tongue is your pinnacle base feature. Yeah, you just get legendary proficiency in one of the two, or not one of, but both of your default skills from Envoy. Great. That is kind of bad, but if you're already legendary, then you just get the reroll that skill once per day. Take the higher result. And Envoy Class DC is now Master, so get it a bit slow, but you don't use it much anyway. Well, except for AoE weapons, which you're technically better with. But it's kind of annoying that for a good 4 levels, you're behind on AoE weapons. Uh, yeah, and then same thing with expert. So you're good 4 levels behind on them, even though you're technically more accurate with them. It's just some weirdness with that, but it is funny though that Silver Tongue actually gives you a reroll, even though you've already got practiced influencer, which also gives you rerolls. It's just a kind of weird world we live in. And it also doesn't do it by default, so I mean, by this point, I think you should be able to have both of them in Legendary. But let me double check skill increases. Because you get one actually skill feats for every 2 levels, but skill increases were every level. So by 15th you can get Legendary. So you'll definitely have those 2 skills up to Legendary, because why wouldn't you? But it's kind of weird that it's like, oh, if you didn't already do that, well, you're screwed. You just get Legendary for free. But it's kind of one of those, it has a fail case that's just not good. But, oh well. Then the feats. So, first off, let me point something out. Actually, before I forget, though, I didn't really mention it much, but get 'em is a directive, so you choose a creature in 60 feet, and it has -1 to AC and reflex saves till your next turn. And if you lead by example by attacking them, which I don't know exactly if that a area fire counts, but I would say it does, just for the sake of simplicity. It's like, no, that does count as a weapon attack. Plus, I'll probably be house ruling some stuff about that, but mostly to stop witch warpers from just grabbing screamers automatically because they can. But you also get a bonus to damage rolls. So it's +1 for everyone, but you also add half your charisma modifier, so probably a +3 bonus for you, +1 for everyone else at the beginning. Then at 5th, 10th, 15th, and 20th, it increases. I'm definitely glad they buffed this, because in the playtest, it was just a flat +1 for everyone, not the +half charisma for you, which really devalued charisma on them, because those are the only 2 things, and they're just tacked on things where it's like, oh yeah, get him gives you a bonus to your own damage with half your charisma. It's something at least. I mean, a +3 is a +3 damage, so it's there, I guess. But like, just with the base one, I really think they need more charisma stuff. But there is something else we have to talk about for Get 'em, and that is the first level feats. So a general problem is that there's just not much in the way of directives. So your only directive at first level is take them alive, which all it does is basically say, oh, you can do non-lethal attacks. Like, yeah, there's a bonus bit of, yeah, you make non-lethal stuff with spells that aren't death or void, which, fair. Though I think maybe it should add vitality, but I don't know the exact rules on undead, though, but I think that might be fun, is like, oh yeah, if you can't non-lethal undead with vitality damage. But basically they get a bonus, and it's like they just ignore the penalty for making non-lethal attacks. So okay, that's highly situational, and like the lead by example is if you make a non-lethal attack, the target of your attack has to get him, but you can't get the lead by example with it. So that's your first level directive. Yeah, it's kind of sad because at first level, you're basically guaranteed to just have one thing that you can do, and that's all you're really going to be doing, which is get them, strike. That's it. Turn after turn after turn in combat. Now, the other feats, first one I'll mention is diverse schemes. You can now have twice your charisma mod assets, which I think, yeah, where basically it does the same thing. It's just that is significantly better because it goes from 1 to 2 to now 4 to 8 just at first level. But realistically, you don't really need that many assets at once. Because more often than not, you're probably going to be focused on one particular asset. Like, unless your GM goes full, like, semi-modern Assassin's Creed with this organization, if you have this web of targets to go through. But ultimately, diverse schemes just feels like this is a hilariously niche feat. Just like Take 'em Alive, actually, where those two are kind of just dead in the water. Because Take 'em Alive, even, I genuinely don't see much use for it because ultimately you can just have non-lethal weapons. There is the spellcaster bonus, but it's kind of like, it's a very expensive thing for that, where you could be taking one of the other 4 things to get at first level instead of it. And speaking of those other things, Pardon Me is a very simple one, but you can use Deception to tumble through. And when you do so, they're suppressed, so it's pretty much just a -1 penalty to attacks and such. Soldier has a lot of them, but here I think it works a bit better than for Soldier, because Soldier has the issue of they want to be hit, but then give people a bunch of to hit penalties, so it doesn't really do anything. But here at least it's like, okay, that's kind of cool. And it is a fun one of, though I think it could be a skill feat instead, but I do like the idea of the Envoy can just casually, like, just, oh, sorry, let me through. Casually in combat, just, I can imagine a lot of shenanigans with this one of being funny with it. Then there's Quip, which, get your quotes out, boys! But it's for intimidation this time, and basically when a creature in 30 feet is damaged by an ally, you can attempt to demoralize them as a reaction. Which is definitely nice because, oh boy, does Envoy have some action restrictions. Because they're basically, like, they have the kind of action restrictions of a spellcaster, but it's like, technically they shouldn't, but especially early on, you're really locked for actions where it's like, well, your choices are get them, strike, and then +1 action for the most part. I mean, you could technically get him and then do something completely different, but that's not really ideal, I don't think. Then also you have Acquire Asset, which is probably one that I would personally take a lot because it just, basically you make a strike, so it does trigger get 'em still. And the target can't be your asset, but I mean, it does nothing if it, like, if you already have someone as your asset, well, it's beneficial. And then on a hit, your target becomes your asset as if you just used Size Up. And on a crit, you can immediately get a Recall Knowledge attempt. I I do think this is supposed to bypass the once per hour bit. It doesn't say that, but I would assume it does. I mean, it's nice. It would be nice if it fit triggered on anything but a crit fail, but or at least the asset part, but oh well, it's definitely a very useful feat if it does work as I think it does, where it ignores the frequency restriction. Then you have Watch Out, where basically you use your reaction when a creature targets an ally in 60 feet of you, and you can see both the attacker and ally. Basically, you give them +2 AC against the attack. It would also be nice if this worked on reflex saves, but even then, this is really good. Though I think actually the reflex save is later anyway. But yeah, Watch Out. It's actually a good one, and I kind of like it. I like having more support on my Envoy. I'm actually going to close field test 4, but I will. So yeah, that one I feel like these two are definitely my main two to take. These are kind of fun, but it's what it is. Take 'em Alive is so situational, it's not even funny. And then Pardon Me, or not Pardon Me, Diverse Schemes just feels... It feels like a early Investigator feat, where when they first added Investigator to 2e, it felt like all their stuff was thematic stuff, and they were so dedicated to their gimmick of like investigating leads that it was just they're built almost entirely around that, kind of to the detriment of the class. But this at least is like, well, the asset isn't that annoying. It's still annoying, but it is there. But then also with Acquire Asset, another note is that this, I do think you could make an argument that you could acquire asset as an opener. So basically you open combat with Acquire Asset in order to try and trigger the getting the target as your asset, so you can then go and use Saw It Coming, which personally I would probably allow it just as a, yeah, you know what, screw it, you get your bonus, buddy. Though it is kind of crazy if you get to do that, because you get a free strike in combat, so you get the first strike, and you get to step or stride. Draw a weapon is useless in that case, because you just shot the guy. But it's certainly a kind of jank situation right now. It's something, it kind of alleviates the asset problem, but not nearly enough in my opinion, because like one of the biggest benefits of having an asset is the initiative buff. So it kind of feels like, well, if you can't use this as an opener, then, well, you're stuck spending a minute before combat. So, yeah. It is what it is. So, moving on to second level, we've got Change of Plans to start us off. So, basically, this is another very niche one, but it does have uses. Basically, if you use Get 'em and then your target dies too soon, you can move your Get 'em to another target. Unfortunately, you don't count as leading by example, which it would be nice if you still got lead by example if the triggering Get 'em had lead by example. But oh well, it's still nice where it's like, oh, you've killed the target. Okay, get him on that guy then. Now, I do actually think that there is a very weird corner case that could happen where you can actually get him, shoot, on your turn, and then if you kill it and you still have an action left, you could change your plans on your turn and then get them on a new target and strike that target. So it's a very niche thing, but I think you can still get the lead by example, but it's a very niche scenario and set of circumstances that would get that to trigger, but it's there at least. Then Don't You Die on Me. It's an action. Basically, you select an ally next to you who's dying and reduce their dying value by 1. If it would go to 0, then they lose the dying condition, but don't increase their wounded condition. They do remain unconscious, though. And they're immune to Don't You Die on Me for an hour, so it's definitely super stabilized, but it's definitely useful. It's one of those... I mean, I'd even say this would be nice to have in the base toolkit, just as a... It's always nice to have it, but you don't always need it. Because costing a feat, I feel like, is slightly annoying. Especially because second level is so stacked relative to some, because you get 2 more directives, which is... It would have been nice to have at least one of those at first, so you have an actually decent directive to use, but it's there. Anyway, as for the non-directive, you have Suppressing Insults. Basically, on a successful Demoralize, your opponent's suppressed. So, it works. It's just, hey, here's more benefit for it. Though I do feel like this could also be on Soldier, maybe. But it does fit Envoy well enough, too. But your 2 directives here is Get In There. So, basically, you and allies in 100 feet of you get +5 to speed. And it's an additional 5 feet at 7th, 12th, and 17th. So at later levels, this becomes even faster. It's pretty much every 5 levels. But then if you step or stride, or do one of the other leadership actions 4 levels later and beyond, other allies in 100 feet of you, which I would probably say would be when you start the move, specifically, not when you end the move, but they can move half their speed as a reaction. So basically just more movement, which probably gonna get pretty crazy with this one, especially when you get to 17th level and they're getting like a, barring any speed bonuses, 40 or casually getting 20 feet from lead by example. It's pretty crazy. And it's on top of just having plus 20 foot movement. That's definitely good, and Solarians are going to love you for this one. Let's be honest. You have a Solarian, you kind of want to get this. Search high and low, meanwhile. +2 to seek checks. Increases by to +3, +4, and +5 at 7th, 12th, and 17th. So basically every 5 levels, directives upgrade, usually. Then lead by example. If you seek yourself, allies in 100 feet of you can also seek as a free action. Yeah, it's there. I mean, it's definitely useful to have, especially because this works out of combat. But I do feel bad for DMs who are going to have this, and it's like, oh, yeah, now the Envoy's just constantly going to search high and low. Which, thinking about it, maybe the lead by example shouldn't do what it does, because it's kind of a, oh, every turn I'm going to search high and low, then seek. Now all my allies get to seek with a bonus. Haha. Where I feel like that could get very annoying quickly when your players get paranoid. I can imagine a lot of DMs are like, oh crap, I can only imagine how bad it would be if they had that. Fourth level, broaden assessment. When you size up an individual to make him an asset, you also get bonus to acrobatics, athletics, and stealth check. Only on your asset, too. Not even the people who know your asset. Yeah, this one is something. Also, it's 3 skills that you're not really geared towards as much. I mean, granted, there are builds that use these stats, but... And, I mean, if you're going the stealth builds, you'll probably want it just for the stealth bonus, but... It's just kind of there. It's a thing, at least. Danger sense. About to roll initiative. And basically, you signal an ally, and you and the target roll initiative and use the higher result. And you do get saw it coming if it's there, so that's nice at least. And this is definitely fun, though. You are going to have to decide who goes first, which is a bit awkward. But definitely useful if one of the players has a very low roll, or you have a very low roll and you know someone has a very high roll, then you can get good bonuses out of initiative. Though you do have a good perception bonus. Now, do note this does use your bonuses separately. So, or at least I think it does. But it's something that's kind of nice, at least, where you can give you and an ally effective advantage on initiative, but with extra steps. Then there's get your head in the game, where you suppress the fatigued condition, and it drops the off guard. So there's that. And then the target's immune to get your head in the game for an hour. This just feels kind of lackluster. Like, it's probably one of those, it's like, it's really good when you need it, but a lot of the others at this level just feel like it's sometimes a bit more useful. Like, Danger Sense is probably the most useful by far. Not the face is nice, but it's only against yourself. And it's only against melee attacks. Really, Paizo? Really? That is so bad. And you can only use this once per target, effectively. But you make a deception check against triggered creature's will DC, aka just willpower defense from 4E. And yes, I will happily make 4E references. Especially for this, because of a reason I'll talk about a bit later. But critical success, -2 to the attack and damage rolls against you, which is pretty good. Success is just a -1 penalty to attack rolls against you till the start of your next turn. And then failure, -1 to the triggering attack roll, crit fail, unaffected. I'll be honest, this is also just so weak, because pretty much it's just, if you succeed, it's like, oh, there's a 5% chance you made the attack miss, a 5% chance it made it just a success, a 5% chance it becomes a crit fail. So it's just a 15% chance it does something, but it's not even a guarantee that it's 15% chance. I'm not really a fan of this. I would have liked if it was always -2 the attack roll, just because that's a bit more useful. Like, don't get me wrong, -1 isn't bad. It's just, it's not great if you don't crit succeed, which It's like you don't even get the penalty to damage rolls. I'd say just have the damage roll penalty on a crit success, whereas success and failure, it's still a -2 penalty to the attack roll, but failure, it's just the triggering attack. Success, it's like until the start of your next turn. Though pretty much just that turn anyway, because it's only against the target. But it's there. Fourth is not amazing. It's got 3 kind of niche ones, and then one that's like, well, that's pretty good. Though I guess second, you could get the other directive, or Don't You Die on Me, maybe. Because second's kind of stacked, because they're all decent. Sixth, basically, if you're trained in Deception and Diplomacy, you use 2 actions, which is... why? Really? Yeah, not a fan of this. Yes, let's give a 2-action thing to a class that is very tight on actions, because it's like you've already got 2 actions pretty much locked in. Mostly because, like, well, you've got to do directive, do effect to get lead by example. But then this just throws it for a loop because it's 2 actions. But make a Deception or Diplomacy check against the will DC of a creature in 30 feet. Afterwards, it's temporarily immune for a day. But crit success, stunned and stupefied. Yeah. That's actually not bad. Success, they're just stupefied for a round. In failure, -1 to perception and will saves, which is not great, but oh well. Then crit fail, they're unaffected, but definitely useful if you face casters regularly. But it's something neat. It's just the 2 actions is... oh, really? On a class that's struggling so much with actions? Dirty Retort is a reaction that basically if a creature misses or critically misses you with a melee strike. So, once again, what the hell, Paizo? This is Starfinder, not Pathfinder. It's like, this is only good on, like, the frontline Envoy. And even then, it's still, like, well, you gotta actually get meleeed by something. That would be nice if they also made this at least stack with Not in the Face if you use it or something. Or, like, you could use it as part of Not in the Face, but... I mean, it's something at least, still. But the triggering creature becomes Clumsy 1 or Enfeebled 1 till the beginning of your next turn, which isn't bad. But, like, unfortunately, it's like, it's the beginning of its next turn, meaning that there's a chance its last action was missing you with a melee strike, thus the Clumsy and Enfeebled doesn't really do much because you're now, it's like, oh, it's till the start of its turn, not the end. So this one definitely feels pretty underpowered, especially in Starfinder. Distant Feint. Why the heck is this not a skill feat? Also, why the heck is this 15 feet? Yeah, this is just... this feels like it should be a skill feat, not an Envoy feat. It's nice, but it's just, oh, you can feint with a ranged weapon at a range of 15 feet? Really? Could this not be at least 30? Where it's like, well, it's bad, but not that bad. It's like, why would you be specifically shooting someone in 15 feet of you? And, like, if you use it with a ranged weapon, it gains the mental trait, which, okay. But that just feels like, why is this even on Envoy, specifically? Like, it shouldn't be just an Envoy thing. It should be something that anyone can take. Because, lo and behold, this is a ranged meta. You really want this at first level. Like, this should be a first level skill feat, not a 6th level Envoy feat. But it's there. It's a nice gesture, but it's got awful range. Like, 15 feet is a bad range to have anyway. Like, even in Pathfinder, that's not great as a maximum. That'll be relevant later in another video. But for this, it's just like, okay, so I want to use this, but it's like I'm using it with a ranged weapon, but it's at a target in 15 feet. That's not very helpful. It's like plus 10 feet on when I can feint. Whoop-de-doo. That's not great even in Pathfinder. But Starfinder? Oh. That's a fourth of what I would actually want it to be. 30 feet at least. It's like, it's not great, but, it's something, at least. Hang in there, though. This one is kind of worded weird, but basically you use an action and then roll a diplomacy check. So it's either DC 20, so yourself or an ally in 30 feet, so it's DC 20 check, but if you're master, you increase it to 30 for plus 5 THP, then if you're legendary, you can do DC 40 for 10 extra temporary hit points. They last for a minute, and the target can only benefit from hanging there once per day. Not amazing, but it's there. But I'm really not a fan of this because, like, okay, so the wording is kind of weird because it's showing you the DCs and how much extra temporary hit points it does without explaining what it does first. So it's like, wait, how much THP do they get by default? But only if you succeed, they get temporary hit points equal to your level, or their level, plus your charisma modifier, while on a crit success, it's double their level plus your charisma modifier. Which, it's not bad. It's great to have, but I have to wait a day to use this again on the same person. Really? When it's not even guaranteed to do anything, because if you fail, they're unaffected, and you can't use it again for a minute. And it becomes an hour on a crit fail. Personally, I think this should probably do half level plus charisma. If you fail, just as a, like, maybe keep the you can't do it again for a minute, but that at least would feel like, okay, there is a very low chance you screw up that badly, but a failure is still worse than a success, so it's like, oh, well, I only get 7 temporary hit points instead of the 10 I would normally get. So it's a penalty, just not that bad of a penalty, where it's like, okay, you're penalized for failing, but it's not oh yeah, if you don't succeed at all, nothing happens and you have to wait a while. Like, being unaffected on a crit fail, yeah, that's fair. But not having a partial effect on a fail is just bad. Granted, like, a random chance to get temporary hit points is not good anyway, but this is just even worse, because, like, even, like, Steel Yourselves was like, at least that, it's like, okay, well, they just have to take an action to get it, but I mean, when you first get it, it's going to be probably like 7 temporary hit points if they spend an action. Plus, you can also get a bonus to saves against damaging effects, which it's not a big one, but it's there. And it's like it only has an hour cooldown. It's like, this is just, I don't know why they're so scared of this. Why does this have to be the way it is? It's like, it's such an underpowered source of temporary hit points. It's like, could we not get more effects? Then we also have Hurry, which, and granted, like, hang in there is probably what would be my default choice, but it's just, I feel like it could be better. But Hurry, meanwhile, it's just an action. Ally in 30 feet becomes quickened. Use the extra action to interact, step, or stride, and then they're immune for 10 minutes. So it's not amazing because it is an extra action to do, but it's actually still nice, at least. It's like, oh, you're quickened now. Get going. Then you have Cheer Up, where if you're trained in medicine, so this doesn't require social skills, but basically they get a like 2 points to basically devalue conditions from among clumsy, enfeebled, frightened, sickened, and stupefied. So they can either lower it by 1 for 2, or lower it by 2 on one of them. So it's there. And they're immune to Cheer Up for a day, which is not amazing, but at the very least, this can be, oh, we've got like a big bad boss, and we need this guy to do their big ability. Okay, reduce your conditions. It is an adjacent ally, though, which is kind of annoying. No, not that. So it's like, you do have to be next to the guy, but it's there at least. Not the most amazing, like, it'd be amazing if it had stunned on there, but reducing it by 2 is also pretty big. Look Alive is an upgrade to Watch Out. And this is the reflex save one. So you gotta wait a bit for it, but it's there. And if you watch out and the attack fails or crit fails, or an ally succeeds or critically succeeds the save, they can stride 10 feet as a free action. They can fly or swim instead, but I mean, that's just movement stuff. They're kind of weird with the wording of movement sometimes. Like, do we really need a different word for whether they're flying or swimming when they do movement? But, oh well. Master Plan. So, you can review stratagems with up to 5 allies. Ironically, this is completely separate from Tactician, where... which is kind of funny, but it comes before, but kind of does a new similar thing, where it's like, oh, you review stratagems with 5 allies. For this as well, it's... so you have 2 different effects that have it now at 13th, but basically you get the new plan reaction. So whenever an ally you reviewed stratagems with is about to attempt an attack roll or skill check, they roll twice and use the better of the results. Then they become immune to Master Plan to your next daily prep. This is very good and very strong, but it is definitely an interesting one. It does feel like they want to have a codified thing of, hey, you review strategies with 5 allies, though they may also want to move away from that for reasons we'll discuss. Sidestep is your last 8th level feat. It's a reaction, so attack roll for a strike targeting you fails or critically fails. Basically this trigger, but better. And you redirect the attack to a creature of your choice adjacent to you and in reach of the triggering attack. And the attacker rerolls a strike on the new target. So that's definitely a fun one of, oh, here, hit this guy instead. Though once again, I kind of want this to work with not in the face. Just you'd be like, not the face! And then sidestep is part of it, but oh well. But this also just feels like it just trounces Dirty Retort because it works on ranged, which is awesome. It's like, yes! Let them do stuff to ranged attacks, please. But it's definitely a fun one. So yeah, 8th, once again, kind of stacked. Like, pretty much just 4th is the worst so far, but it's gonna get worse. Don't worry. Cut them deep. If you're a master in intimidating people, when you fail to demoralize, you get a success. You still crit fail, but basically you're almost always succeeding now. It's like you either screw up so bad it's embarrassing, or you succeed, or you really succeed and make them piss their pants. Then when you successfully demoralize your asset or get them target, which it's great at least that they support both of, hey, yeah, these just work with either. So it's kind of annoying that you've got two totally different things going on, but that'll be in my final thoughts. But they don't become immune to other attempts to demoralize them, which is actually really nice, because now you can constantly demoralize them. Great. And keep in mind that if it's your asset, which you want them to be your asset, you get a bonus to intimidate them. So that's even juicier. Then we've got 'em. Basically once per round when an ally damages your get 'em target, the ally gains temporary points equal to half your level, or equal to your level if the strike was a crit. If you have the lead by example, increase the amount of temporary hit points by the damage roll bonus, I guess. I would imagine it's the damage roll bonus of that the ally gets, but this definitely feels like it was written before the playtest version, where there's two different numbers with the lead by example. Though actually, I don't know, I feel like that should be the bonus the Envoy gets, just because, I mean, 1 plus half charisma is definitely better than just the straight damage roll bonus, because it's kind of low. But either way, it's still nice that it's like, oh, hey, you know, here's a get 'em bonus that's actually really cool. I wish it came sooner, or maybe it was even baseline, but then at 14th and 18th, you use it an additional time, so you get more uses per round. And this is even a free action, so yeah, that's awesome. Kind of annoying that it doesn't work on you, but well. It is what it is. But ultimately, I do really like this. It does seem like it could be a bit sooner or baseline, but well. Smooth diversions. If you're a master in deceiving people, when you create a diversion, you can immediately sneak or step as a free action. And if you critically succeed against one or more creatures, you can instead choose to get him as a free action. Which is nice, but they should specify that you have to critically succeed the created diversion. But, oh well. In addition, creatures only become aware of the diversion if you crit fail. Which is also nice as a, yeah, totally not doing a diversion. So definitely useful for some people, though. That part definitely feels like it kind of wants to be a skill feat, but well. Then tag team is another one. And the target of your get him is critically hit by an ally's attack or critically fails a reflex save from an attack or spell. So I guess, yeah, the area fire does actually count as an attack, which, that's nice. But this is a reaction, and you make a strike against a triggering creature if it's in the first range increment or in your reach for melee. Definitely a bit annoying that this is at the same level as Gotham, which is just, in my opinion, so much better. Because this one will trigger less and uses a reaction. But granted, I think Gotham should be earlier or baseline, so not a big problem. It does seem like it could be 10th still. Then 12th, we got Ready for Anything. So at the end of your turn, if you didn't use an Envoy directive, you gain an additional reaction. So if you don't use a directive, which you get 2 reactions, but you don't have any by default, really. So you'd have to have stuff like sidestep. I mean, I'd say Dirty Retort or Not in the Face, but those don't really do much anyway. Or Watch Out. So it's like there's only really 2 you'd realistically have. With the caveat that because of the way it works, tag team and, well, I guess there's also New Plan as a reaction from Master Plan, but it's like there's 3 that you'd have, but they're all, or 4 that you might actually have that are all feats. So yeah. And I don't think there's many baseline either. But because practiced influencers free, so this is one of those that just feels so weird because the reactions aren't really a thing that much, except like, and this is definitely going to be a noob trap of, oh, by the way, there is a reactive Envoy build. But unless you look ahead, and before you say, well, you should always look ahead, not everyone's going to do that. Some people are absolutely going to only look at the stuff that's relevant at the moment and build from there. It's part of why I despise designs like the Eldritch Knight in the context of 5e, where it's like, if you don't plan ahead as a fighter, well, you can screw yourself out of playing a subclass because it requires your dump stat to be good. It's like, so you need intelligence for this, but if you don't have intelligence, which is highly likely because it's fighter, you normally don't need intelligence at all, and it's kind of the default dump stat, but if you don't have it, you can't be an Eldritch Knight, really. Or at least use Eldritch Knight to its full capacity. And of course, some people will say, well, actually, you can use Eldritch Knight even without intelligence. But my point is, it's like, you don't really get the full benefit of it if you don't have intelligence. Where it's kind of a, oh. And it kind of applies for anywhere. It's like, oh, you needed a specific stat, but there was no guarantee that you actually have that stat. Or it might be a, And in that case, it's like, oh, you need a stat, but it's your dump stat. Like, the only thing that would be worse if it was on Barbarian. It's like, oh, a Barbarian that needs intelligence. What? It's like, you'd never guess it does at first level, but turns out you might actually have wanted it. But anyway, that's kind of that kind of design. It's like, this would be better if there was a variety of reactions you'd have baseline for Envoy, but I mean, it's not the worst. It does play into the build crafty nature of Pathfinder 2e, or at least Starfinder 2e in this case, but it would be nice if this was something that actually tied into the base class more, but oh well. Then that'll show them. So this is also a watch out buff, but when you use your watch out reaction, you can make a melee or range strike against the triggering creature, ignoring your multi-attack penalty, and if you hit, the target is suppressed. This almost feels like it's supposed to be a fighter feat, but it does tie into Envoy stuff. But that's definitely cool. Though I think this actually... It doesn't say, but this might actually interrupt the attack, which would actually be really cool if it does, since the trigger for watch out is when a creature targets an ally with an attack. Thus, you can actually that'll show them, and if you hit and suppress them, it actually triggers off that attack. Otherwise, it should definitely say till the end of its next turn, but if it is, even if it is the way, if it is the way where it interrupts, then that's actually really nice, is it's like, oh, you're suppressed for this attack now. Have fun. Then there's unstoppable directives, which is kind of weird, but basically you increase the amount of temporary hit points granted by your directives, which is by your key attribute, aka your full charisma modifier. And then from non-directive actions by half your charisma mod. This is nice as well, though there's not really a lot of temporary hit point stuff lying around. I mean, you've got the brace for impact stuff, which it's a nice buff and it does get the full benefit, but otherwise it's like, I mean, you've got Gotham, which I don't think counts as a directive, unfortunately. So that's not amazing. Then you've got Hang in There, which, like, that could have used a lot more from it, but I mean, it's still there. I also like how this is called Unstoppable Directives, but it only buffs it only buffs one directive, and I don't know, it's just, this one has a weird name. It's not the weirdest, but I'll point it out later for us to laugh at. Do it now. One action, which it's great. It's only one action, but basically, if you've issued an Envoy directive since the start of your turn, basically you motivate an ally. Choose an ally at 60 feet as a free action. They can immediately take any action that would satisfy conditions of one of your active Envoy directives, and they're then immune to it for a minute. So basically, you use your action to then give them a action to trigger the directive. So basically, the way I would explain it is, so for Get 'em, it would be they get to make an attack, I guess. And then, so it's like, oh, you get to make a strike. if it's the... Oh boy, I don't remember the name of it, but the brace for impact one. And that one, it's like kind of dumb name because like it's the action they need to do is brace for impact, but then it's got a different name for some reason. But they would get to brace for impact if you use that directive. So it's definitely a neat one. I do like it, though it does play into the space of another class, though I think it's ultimately fine. It should be something they're able to do. It would be nice if this came sooner, but well. Only annoying thing is, though, that it kind of ends up being a, welp, have fun with all three of your actions being taken up by directive, lead by example, do it now. But it's something a cool one. Like, it is genuinely cool. Down to the wire. This is another reaction, at least. Basically, you complete the last action of your turn. It's not ended yet. So, you end your turn. It's like, you've done the last action. And then you do this. And if you've issued an envoy directive, but haven't led by example, you can use a reaction to do something that would let you lead by example, which also means this doesn't work with ready for anything. So you're wasting your reaction just to do the act. Like, basically it's quickened with extra steps, which, yeah, it's kind of jank, but oh well. It's something. It's nice that it's like, oh yeah, as a reaction, you get to do an action that would let you lead by example for a directive, but it is kind of clunky, where it's basically just complicated, quickened. Ready to roll, free action when you roll initiative. Just take a directive action. But unless you lead by example, it only lasts till the end of your first turn, which... yeah, that's really bad. So basically, you have to do something to lead by example, because that lets it last till the beginning of your next turn. And, like, what really makes this feat stupid is it's the same level as Do It Now. Also, this is one of the very few ways you get to action compress on Envoy with your directives. And it's like literally two different things that kind of give you action compression, but one of them is only once per combat and has some complicated stuff that would be simplified by a feat that's literally the same level, while the other is just very complicated, like, for what it does. And it is kind of a, well, it's quickened but worse. And it doesn't even work with another feat that would... It would be really nice if it worked with it, but nope. Apparently, we can't use directives and have more reactions, because that would be overpowered for some reason. Which, I mean, that might actually be a bit much, but it does feel like, so you mean I can either use a directive, my main mechanic, or get an extra reaction? Why? Just why? Then extend directive at 16, so it's a free action when you begin your turn, and you issued at least one envoy directive on your last turn, and you just free action use an envoy directive you already used on your last turn. It doesn't extend lead by example, but at 16th, we finally get action compression for directives. Yeah, last 5 levels of the game, boys. And that's when we get decent action compression. It's like pretty much like the latter third of the game about, I think. But like the last quarters when we get the actual like good action compression for Envoy. It's like last 5 levels. Yay. We finally get it. Know your target, 3 actions. One or more creatures currently your asset, so they must attempt a will save against your Envoy class DC. They critically succeed. They are aware you're observing them. They're also immune for a day after this. Success, you learn whether the target's intelligence, wisdom, or charisma modifiers are higher or lower. Failure, you intuit your target's vague surface thoughts, and you learn whether int and stuff is higher or lower. And then on a crit fail, you intuit the surface thoughts for 1 minute. I would just say, like, compress it as you get the effects of a success on a failure and crit fail, plus the vague thoughts, but that's just how I would word them. And those are your 2 feats, so I know I'm definitely going straight to extend directive, because that's just... I mean, because granted, most of the time, by default, you're just going to get them over and over and over and over again, so you might as well get extend directive. Because it's not like you're really repeating a lot of the others, because you only had 3 others. Yeah. Then 18th level. Get them. Who the heck named this? This is the dumbest name I have ever seen. Like, specifically within the context of get him is a contraction of get them. I think contraction's the term, but basically it's like get him is the shorthand of get them. Because, yeah, reasons and logic. So they've called this feat that buffs get them, even though get them is basically saying get them. Oh gosh, Paizo, this is unintentionally so stupid when you look at it. Like, there's a lot of names in this playtest that are just really Paizo, or okay, that's a chuckle. But this is just, oh gosh, the irony of your grammar. But anyway, I would call this get them all or get them all instead, because basically you can choose any number of enemies in range instead of a single one. Yeah, that's your 18th level feat, boys. Like, it is really good, to be fair, where it's like a 60-foot emanation from you, where everybody in 60 feet of you is now the target of your get 'em. But I will say it would be nice if there was maybe a lower level path to this, where it's, oh, you can get them on charisma targets, and then you get them all. Like maybe get those guys, and or get those fools, maybe, to kind of make it sound cooler. Or get those chumps or something, where it's like up to charisma enemies or something. And then get them all is the upgrade of that, which makes it what it is. But it would be nice to have something like this earlier, but it's still pretty cool of just, oh yeah, suddenly everyone in 60 feet of me is in danger. And the soldiers in particular are going to benefit. Soldiers and spellcasters are going to love this one because AoE attacks go boom. Uh, like, get them into a cataclysm. Holy cow, that's going to be stupid. Then follow the leader. Uh, basically, you're always considered leading by example. Yeah, that's your 18th level feats, boys. The two simplest things in the world. Like, this is so boring, but. And, like, follow leader especially, it's like. I mean, the big problem that comes up with it is that most of the time, with a lot of them. Because, like, for one, this doesn't even work with one of them, the Seek one, because the Seek bonus is, like, I guess, like, does that trigger immediately when you search high and low? Like, they get the Seek, but it's like, how does that work? And then, like, same with Get In There. It's like, how does it work with those two? Like, I mean, the others kind of all make some sense, but it's just, why is this so, it's just so boring. Like, it's a good benefit, but also it's like, oh, suddenly you don't really need to do anything. And it's like, most of the game it's been fine, especially because, like, get 'em is your main directive. So I mean, most of the time you want to strike anyway because you get a good benefit out of it. It's kind of, it, in concept this is good. It's just A, boring, and B, it's kind of late, you know? It's like, so it gets around the action issues, but you're at 18th level. Like, I mean, granted, it's very good if you're regularly gonna just directive, but in one turn to be specific, but ultimately it's like, this is kind of just, yeah, you've got two very simple feats here. 20th level, endlessly adaptive. Finally, an adaptive talent feat. Because, yeah, that's the thing you have, apparently. They finally remembered it. Uh, but you get 2 additional skill feats. Okay? But you can also trade your adaptive talent feats by spending an hour to plan. So basically take an hour and just suddenly swap your feats. But if you have limited uses, you can't trade it out if you've already used them. So fair. That's definitely an oversight avoided for once in this playtest. Uh, however, this feat, it's like, this is a 20th level feat. It's kind of hard to get excited about, oh, I get 2 more skill feats from adaptive talent, and I change them with an hour of planning it. I feel like maybe this should be split up into multiple sections where you get, like, quick adaptation earlier, and then, like, you get additional adaptive talents as a separate feat. I'm just not sure this should be 20th level and be the only adaptive talent thing. But, oh well. True Leader at 20th. Once per turn, you can issue an Envoy directive as a free action. I mean, for one, this is pretty much invalidated by the fact that Extend Directive exists, and in the current form, that's pretty much all you need. And it's like, it's the same level as Know Your Target, but I mean, granted, you'd also kind of probably want to catch up on a 14th level feat, so you might skip it for that, but at 20th level, they finally give you the, yeah, no, you just get one free directive per turn. Yeah, that's pretty darn late for this. It's a very boring feat, but I'll be blunt. I think the 20th level feats need to go. They need some new 20th level feats because these are not exciting. Like, these should be very cool and awesome things. It shouldn't be, oh, here's the thing you should have had way earlier that would help fix the problem that Envoy has where they're just so action locked. Because you don't start getting stuff that gets around it till 14th level. It's like, okay, so I don't start getting action compression for my deal until 14th. So it's like almost halfway through the later half of the game. And then at 20th level, the end of my career, I get the one thing that I've desperately needed. And it also comes after a feat that basically, in the current iteration, kind of does the exact thing I'd want it to do without, like, sure, it has some restrictions and it doesn't work with the other two default directives. This one does, but it does feel like, I mean, this could also be a feat path where you get Extend Directive and then you can get True Leader. But ultimately, this has been the Envoy, and now it's time to address the elephant in the room. It's the thing you've seen from the start here. Battlecry playtest. Yeah, you knew it was coming. The Commander. So, pretty much these are very similar classes. They're similar but different in some ways, but for example, Commander is intelligence-based, but they still have 8 plus con HP. They get Society and Warfare lore. They have fewer skills. They only get 2 skills to start, but in practice, a lot of the time, you're actually going to get the same skills because there's a decent chance, like, if you go optimal path, you might actually drop intelligence for Dex Con Wiz. But that would mean that usually a commander is going to have +4 int, so they'll have 6 skills, whereas an Envoy would have 6 skills with a +0 int mod. And also, it should be noted that Commander will have more languages than an Envoy does. Yeah. Kind of a flavor fail there. Or a missed opportunity, I'd say. But then they have all armors and martial weapons. So they get better defensive stuff, which, I mean, because if you think about it, Commander would actually have, like, the same opportunity cost to get into ranged as an Envoy would. And then we get to the big issue. So their mechanic is called tactics. So you have this folio of tactics that you use abilities from. So for one, tactics are completely severed from feats. Or at least you don't need feats to get more tactics. And you start with 4 tactics. Also, the number of allies you affect is 2 plus your int mod. So basically everyone, though, because this is Battlecry and there are army rules, it does seem like there will be more benefit to having it. Like Envoy, it affects the number you need it to, because usually you're going to be playing in a 4 to 6 player game. That's usually the comfortable number, but like 7 or more is rare and kind of hard to deal with at times. But then at later levels, you get new tactics. So you get expert tactician, so your class DC is now expert, and you can add a new tactic to your folio, but you can also choose expert. You do have to prepare your tactics, but well. Then at 15th, you get master tactician, so you get a master tactic. And then legendary at 19th, so you get a legendary tactic now. So yeah. And it's like you've also got mobility tactics and attack tactics, so yeah. Like, granted, it wasn't perfect, because one of the problems that Commander had is that, like, what was it? Like, Strike Hard, this tactic was basically invalidated by some of the others you get later. Like, I think most of the others actually, it's like, it's just inferior. But now there is one thing to mention about tactics, that yeah, there are a lot of 2 and 1 action ones, but like, as you can kind of tell, it's just, tactics are just way more fun and interesting than the Envoy directives. Like, if you compare it, it's like you can prepare 2 different tactics on your turn, and then, like, yeah, they do have to use a reaction to respond to it, but the point is, like, you prepare 2 tactics for the day from a list of 4. And you can just at any time use one of these 2 tactics. Your ally can use a reaction to follow it. And you do have an ability that, you know, once per turn, you can give, or once per round, you can give an ally a free reaction for the tactic. So basically, first tactic's free, second is a reaction, but like, the main thing is they just instantly do something. So, and it's like you start with multiple and have multiple options, and it's just, as an Envoy, you have get them and that's it. Technically, you could get a first level feat to get one, but it's pretty bad. And it's like you have to get feats to get other at-will directives. The other 2 are limited use ones, and you're also stuck with them. It's like, well, at 7th, you always get Steal Yourselves, and it's a once per hour. Then at 13th, you always get Show Them What You Got, which is once per 10 minutes. It just, it's one of those moments of, so we have this class that just kind of does a lot of the stuff that it plays in a similar space to Envoy, because ultimately they're both descendants of the same class, where D&D 4th edition had a class called the Warlord. And in the player's handbook, it had two builds, the Inspiring Warlord and the Tactical Warlord. Warlord was always based around strength and using melee weapons, though there's a build that used ranged. It's kind of a weird one because they're a strength archer, but oh well. But player's handbook, you had Inspiring Warlord, Tactical Warlord. Inspiring Warlord used charisma. Tactical used intelligence. You can kind of tell that the commander is the Tactical Warlord reborn, and it's definitely a more direct descendant of Warlord, where Envoy is kind of a half child, maybe, or like, it's a child, but it's like it's kind of turned out a bit further away, which is fine. And it's like it's fine for them to go in different directions, and ultimately the way they both work, they do make sense. Like, I mean, it is unfortunate that Envoy's stuck with only light armor, and I think their class DC actually progresses a bit slower. Though I don't think they use it as much anyway, so it's like it's not too bad. But it's like it's just a class where it's like they play in similar spaces, but Commander is just so much more fun and interesting, because sure, they don't have as many big buffs that the whole team benefits from at the same time, but the Commander just has more dynamic gameplay where you're nowhere near as action locked either. Because the Envoy, at first level, you're just stuck with get 'em, strike. 6th level, you get your Acts of Leadership, which gives you other options, but they're not always useful. Like From the Shadows with nowhere to hide? Welp, you're screwed. So ultimately it does kind of end up where Commander is just a more fun Envoy right now. Sure, Envoy's charismatic, but that's all it's got going for it, really. And it's just kind of it's lacking that bit of oomph, and ultimately what I think should be done as a suggestion, probably maybe even get rid of Social Mastermind entirely, just scrap it, give it a rest. Because ultimately, like, the way they've designed it, it's just an annoying thing. It's kind of an extra thing that it's like it has so many different directions it's trying to pull itself, where it's like you've got the directives, but they're not really developed much. You've got the reaction stuff, which is completely optional, which it's fine, but it's kind of hidden behind, oh, by the way, you actually really care about reactions in secret. And there's a whole reactive build, which it's kind of weird that there's just no reactions baseline that would benefit from the multiple reactions. And then there's also, like, you've only got one directive to start with. Could we not get two? And so ultimately, my suggestion would probably be Social Mastermind is gone. It's an extra mechanic we don't need. And then bring in Steel Yourselves to the baseline. Maybe give it a once per 10 minutes instead of once per hour deal, but basically give it out at the start so you have a way to give temporary hit points and help keep your allies going throughout the day, and also make it where your party doesn't need to worry about having a support caster as much, because you bring some, like, sustainability to the party that a caster with heal would normally do. And then another thing I would do is a second at-will directive. Or maybe even make it where Steel Yourselves isn't a directive. It's just some ability that gives out temporary hit points once per hour or something. But have a second directive that's at will, so you would always use this, that is defensive in nature. So maybe it would be +1 to AC and reflex saves. And maybe it would be I don't know, probably stay on guard or something like that, perhaps. But just a defensive one that's basically the inverse of Get 'em as an option, where it adds just a lot more dynamic stuff of, okay, well, I can use Get 'em and, you know, push the attack, but I also, you know, maybe there's something that clearly, like, we need to get ready to defend, and, like, you know, we're midway through a fight, but it's not going well, so we need to worry about protection. And so you give this defend yourselves order, and it's like, okay, defend yourselves instead. And then maybe it's like, oh, raise a shield or take cover as a lead by example. And, you know, just basically prepare for incoming damage and make it where you're able to withstand the assaults. Or maybe stand your ground would be a good name for it, but basically something else to do besides Get 'em as a directive, where it's like, okay, now you have two directives, and there's more of a choice where, yeah, like, Get 'em is still going to be the main choice, but you have another option in the first place, and you might regularly want to use it, like, you know, you were going up against a dragon, and, oh, we better brace for attack, and, you know, it's probably going to open up with a fire breath. Okay, brace for attack, defense buff, dragon breathes fire on you, and you help your allies get through it more. So just to have some option that would be tactically useful rather than just spamming Get 'em all the time would be a great place to start. Also, I will always mention this, but please let Envoy get extra languages known equal to charisma mod. That would be so cool for, like, what they're supposed to be. It's like, I mean, this whole description is basically like, you're a leader, you talk with people and all that. Like, you know, people might ask you for help navigating social situations. Like, you know, look for ways to talk out of fights. You know, during social encounters, you know, you're off in the face. But it's like, you don't use intelligence, so you don't get more languages. So why not just give them plus charisma languages? And I would even have this in addition to int mod. So if you want to make a wacky build where, you know, you go all into skills and languages and have +3 int, okay, you just casually get +7 languages known at first level as a fun thing of just, hey, yeah, you're an envoy. You're supposed to be kind of a diplomat. Like, you know, you're an influencer. You know, you like talking with people. Why wouldn't you be the best class at languages and stuff? I mean, heck, like, one of their things is their stuff is supposed to kind of be based on language. So why not let them have more languages to speak with people with? Especially since Starfinder's probably going to be more of a, yeah, no, you see languages of all kinds all over the place, especially with the number of alien races that are going to be out there of, yeah, no, there's just a million alien races and a million alien languages. Here's some more languages known for the character who actually cares about language. It's a missed opportunity from first edition. I would love if they rectified it in second. Also for 7th level, what to replace Steal Yourselves with. I mean, I honestly don't know. Maybe a reaction as well. Because that's another thing that they could add, is maybe a reaction ability that triggers off of something. Maybe as a replacement to Saw It Coming, there's now a reaction that you get. Or maybe have it like as a reaction to an ally getting critically hit or something. You can use it to basically give them some temporary hit points as well. Just so you can like soften the blow of, oh gosh, or my ally got crit or critically failed their save against damage. Okay, here's some temporary hit points for you, buddy, as a reaction. But just some more stuff to kind of make it more cohesive. Also, really look at the feats and kind of get rid of this Pathfinder thinking of, oh yeah, this is a great idea for a feat of that only triggers on a melee attack. Yeah, let's give you 2 feats when you're not a Solarian. So yeah, this is like only for from the front. And that's not even accounting for like from the front could easily use a pistol and still be quite effective. Because you still can use a shield. So it's like, yeah. Also, maybe give them medium armor default to kind of compensate for their lower defense compared to Commander. Just because, like, and also I will say this, I don't care if stuff is more powerful than Pathfinder options. I do care, however, if it's like, oh, this is significantly worse than a Pathfinder option. Which, that will be relevant next time. But in this case, like, yeah, and then from the front, of course, would get heavy armor. Just as a way to kind of say, yeah, you can have more decent defenses. If only because they're so weak in the defense front that it's like, yeah, it's... Whereas, also maybe trade Expert in Reflex for Expert in Fortitude. Simply because Commander does get Reflex as well. So it's Reflex Will too. And it's like, yeah, maybe not. They shouldn't be exactly the same. And also, I like the idea that they get trained at Expert in Fortitude as a kind of nod to eating a wide variety of food. Like, you know, if you are the more diplomatic kind, you know, you might like eat meals with people. And this is tying into like Envoy, like class themes, but you'd have a good fortitude. So you, like, you know, if you went as like a diplomat or literal envoy in the IRL context to go meet with some people, you might sit down and have a meal with them. Well, like, especially in an intergalactic setting, that's often going to mean eating some food not meant for your kind. So you might have a bit tougher gut and internals to just, like, eat alien food. Like, you know, you might be a human, like, eating Vesk food. You know, it's like, it wasn't meant for humans, but, you know, you're polite and you gotta, you know, you're eating the Vesk food. It's like, yeah, you might build up a stronger stomach and build up your fortitude a bit. Just from stuff like that is just random spitballing ideas. But it is certainly nice, though. Like, I will say, Envoy, it has some neat ideas. It just kind of feels very underbaked. Like, I mean, they don't start getting action compression for directives until the latter half of the game. And it's late into the latter half of the game that they start getting them. Like, there's a whole reactions thing that is currently completely optional and easily missable, where it doesn't really appear at all. It could be brought in baseline, but I don't know if that's necessary as much. I mean, they're currently action locked, but it does feel like also this class has suffered the most from a other Pathfinder 2e stuff coming out where it's like, oh, it's like people were excited for Envoy because it's like, oh yeah, finally a support marshal that's kind of like a warlord. And then we got Commander, and it's like, oh, here's one for Pathfinder, and it's really cool. And then we get Envoy, and it's like, oh, yeah, this is... Because first in the field test is like, okay, so this is a class that has 0 uses for its key attribute in the actual class. It's like, so tell me, why is Envoy a charisma class? Could I not get dexterity as my main stat and do, like, heck, do better than the current one? It's like, I don't have any special uses for charisma, which is especially annoying because you're very tight on actions, so... Like, yeah, charisma skills are good, but they require actions, so... They don't really work out well when you've got 2 actions just to do your main thing. So, yeah. And also I will say, this is a class where I feel like it just feels rushed. It's like, even after the field test, it still feels very rushed. And I'll even say, the charisma stuff really does feel tacked on. Like, at least for the lead by example on Get 'em, it's like, okay, I can see that. It does work out. It's kind of like, oh yeah, it's a propulsive +1, but using charisma. Fair. It makes sense. It's, a bit weak at first for something that costs an action, but it's there at least. But then, it's like, ultimately it's just, I mean, granted, like, all of this playtest does feel like there's a lot of stuff that was rushed, like, especially in the next one. Poor Solarian. Poor Solarian, but there's a lot of that, like, this feels rushed. And the more I look at it, like, in the Envoy's case, like, this class feels like it's being rushed. Like, to a big degree. And also, it's being designed in a vacuum where it's like, oh, hey, here's a class inspired by the Inspiring Warlord from 4E, in a way. Like, I don't know how much it has been inspired by it, but, it's kind of like, oh, here's a spiritual successor to the 4E Warlord, except specifically inspiring. And then Pathfinder team comes out, and they have a spiritual successor to the Tactical Warlord of 4E, except it does even cooler things and straight up has this signature mechanic of the 4E Warlord of, yeah, no, I don't need to hit with my weapon. I hit with my fighter. And they have that as their main mechanic, and it's like, okay, this is just a lot of cooler stuff. And they just play out more interestingly, where Envoy, it's like, okay, so yeah, I buff everyone, which is nice, but on the flip side, I also have, like, I have to do one action to start, start the directive, and then I'm really incentivized to do another action to buff it. And it's kind of it just feels like if you don't lead by example, then you're really doing it wrong. And it's just a kind of, it doesn't, it needs more time in the oven for certain. And like, and ultimately, I will also say this, like, this isn't a class I would play anyway. It's definitely the bottom of my list conceptually. It's kind of the Bard of Starfinder 2e right now, where, yeah, it's the one class I'm least inclined to play. Just because I'm not as big on, like, pure support. But at the very least, it's cool. And I do appreciate what it's trying to do. It's just, it's got a lot of work to do before it feels good. And I also feel bad for the Starfinder team just because it's come out at the time where we've seen the Battlecry playtest where it has a class that just trounces this. And I'll even say, in general, I feel like looking at the two more recent Pathfinder playtests, those classes felt so much more polished than the Starfinder 2e playtest classes. It's like, there's just so much jank going on here where it's like, if this is really supposed to release in the same time frame as those classes, like the Pathfinder playtest classes, this might need a delay with how much jank there is and how much work needs to be done. Where it's like, yeah, these are just so rough. Like, Envoy is just an underbaked class. Solarian's underpowered as heck. The other four have a bunch of jank involved as well. And yeah, ultimately, it's like, these aren't great. These are definitely in a worse place than even Exemplar. And I'd say Exemplar had a very jank mechanic, but it's like, it functions. It just, the Divine Spark juggling didn't really feel like that fun of a gameplay loop to me, where it's, and like, I didn't play test it at all, but like, just looking at it, it's like, yeah, I would much rather play a class that's not doing that, where it's all or nothing. But I mean, because like, having looked at 3.5 stuff more, it's like, that was literally an Incarnum class, but it's like not really doing anything unless you have points in it at all. But oh well. Anyway, for Envoy, I'd say it's definitely my least favorite class conceptually. Like, it's kind of doomed to that anyway. But mechanically, I'd say for what it's trying to be, it's definitely the most lackluster class. It's not underpowered, I don't think. I think it's actually good. It's just, it doesn't play well. It doesn't play as good as it can. Like, especially if you consider, like, you're going to have to reload, and they have a lot of action stuff they need to do. And it's like, they're so action intensive, yet get no action compression until the end. And then you look at Operative, who has all the action compression. And it's like, how did this happen? But regardless, I hope to look at this in the future and say, hey, this is a very cool and interesting class from what it looks like to play. I mean, ultimately, nothing will make me want to play this the most, but I mean, that's kind of the same for the Bard, unfortunately. It's, something's going to be your worst class and, like, the least favorite that you don't play. It's just life, but oh well. Anyway, without further ado, I will see y'all next time. Halo Zoo out.